Good morning, class. When we last left off, Montag was homesick because he didn't want to go to work, and Captain Beatty came and visited him and gave him a little bit of history on why books were banned and told him that he expected to see him at work that night. Montag watched through the window as Beatty drove away in his gleaming yellow flamed-colored Beetle with the black charcoal tires. Across the street and down the way, the other houses stood with their flat fronts. What was it Clarice had said one afternoon? No front porches? My uncle says there used to be front porches, and people sat there sometimes at night, talking when they wanted to talk, rocking, and not talking when they didn't want to talk. Sometimes they just sat there and thought about things, turned things over. My uncle says the architects got rid of the front porches because they didn't look well. But my uncle says that was merely rationalizing it. The real reason, hidden underneath, might be they didn't want people sitting like that, doing nothing, rocking, talking. That was the wrong kind of social life. People talked too much, and they had time to think. So they ran off with the porches. And the gardens, too. Not many gardens anymore to sit around in. And look at the furniture. No rocking chairs anymore. They're too comfortable. Get people up and running around. My uncle says, and my uncle, and my uncle. Her voice faded. Montag turned and looked at his wife, who sat in the middle of the parlor talking to an announcer, who in turn was talking to her. Mrs. Montag, he was saying, this, that, and the other. Mrs. Montag? Something else and still another. The converter attachment, which had cost them $100, automatically supplied her name whenever the announcer addressed his anonymous audience, leaving a blank where the proper syllables could be filled in. A special spot WaveX scrambler also caused his televised image in the area immediately about his lips to mouth the vowels and consonants beautifully. He was a friend, no doubt of it, a good friend, Mrs. Montag. Now look right here. Her head turned, though she quite obviously was not listening. Montag said, it's only a step from not going to work today to not working tomorrow and to not working at the firehouse ever again. You're going to work tonight, though, aren't you? Said Mildred. I haven't decided. Right now I've got an awful feeling I want to smash things and kill things. Go take the Beetle. No, thanks. The keys to the Beetle are on the night table. I always like to drive fast when I feel that way. You get it up around 95 and you feel wonderful. Sometimes I drive all night and come back and you don't know it. It's fun out in the country. You hit rabbits. Sometimes you hit dogs. Go, take the Beetle. No, I don't want to this time. I want to hold on to this funny thing. God, it's gotten big on me. I don't know what it is. I'm so damned unhappy. I'm so mad and I don't know why I feel like I'm putting on weight. I feel fat. I feel like I've been saving up a lot of things and don't know what. I might even start reading books. They'd put you in jail, wouldn't they? She looked at him as if he were behind the glass wall. He began to put on his clothes, moving restlessly about the bedroom. Yes, and it might be a good idea, before I hurt someone. Did you hear Beatty? Did you listen to him? He knows all the answers. He's right. Happiness is important. Fun is everything. And yet I kept sitting there saying to myself, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. I am, Mildred's mouth beamed, and proud of it. I'm going to do something, said Montag. I don't even know what yet, but I'm going to do something big. I'm tired of listening to this junk, said Mildred, turning from him to the announcer again. Montag touched the volume control on the wall, and the announcer was speechless. Millie, he paused, this is your house as well as mine. I feel it's only fair that I tell you something now. I should have told you before, but I wasn't even admitting it to myself. I have something I want you to see, something I've put away and hid during the past year, now and again, once in a while. I didn't know why, but I did it, and I never told you. He took hold of a straight-backed chair and moved it slowly and steadily into the hall near the front door and climbed up on it and stood for a moment like a statue on a pedestal, his wife standing under him, waiting. Then he reached up and pulled back the grill of the air conditioning system and reached far back, inside to the right, and moved still another sliding sheet. of metal and took out a book. Without looking at it, he dropped it to the floor. He put his hand back up and took out 2 books and moved his hand down and dropped the 2 books to the floor. He kept moving his hand and dropping books, small ones, fairly large ones, yellow, red, green ones. When he was done, he looked down upon some 20 books lying at his wife's feet. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't really think, but now it looks as if we're in this together." Mildred backed away, as if she were suddenly confronted by a pack of mice that had come up out of the floor. He could hear her breathing rapidly, and her face was paled out, and her eyes were fastened wide. She said his name over, twice, 3 times. Then, moaning, she ran forward, seized a book, and ran towards the kitchen incinerator. He caught her, shrieking. He held her, and she tried to fight away from him, scratching. "No, Millie, no, wait. Stop it, will you? You don't know. Stop it." He slapped her face. He grabbed her again and shook her. She said his name and began to cry. "Millie," he said, "listen, give me a second, will you? We can't do anything. We can't burn these. I want to look at them, at least look at them once. Then if what the captain says is true, we'll burn them together. Believe me, we'll burn them together. You must help me." He looked down into her face and took hold of her chin and held her firmly. He was looking not only at her, but for himself and what he must do in her face. "Whether we like this or not, we're in it. I've never asked for much from you in all these years, but I ask it now. I plead for it. We've got to start somewhere here. Figuring out why we're in such a mess, you and the medicine at night and the car, and me and my work. We're heading right for the cliff, Millie. God, I don't want to go over. This isn't going to be easy. We haven't anything to go on, but maybe we can piece it out and figure it out and help each other. I need you so much right now. I can't tell you. If you love me at all, you'll put up with this 24, 48 hours. That's all I ask. Then it'll be over. I promise. I swear. And if there is something here, just one little thing out of a whole mess of things, maybe we can pass it on to someone else." She wasn't fighting anymore, so he let her go. She sagged away from him and slid down the wall and sat on the floor looking at the books. Her foot touched one, and she saw this and pulled her foot away. "That woman, the other night, Millie, you weren't there. You didn't see her face. And Clarice, you never talked to her. I talked to her, and men like Beatty are afraid of her. I can't understand it. Why should they be so afraid of someone like her? But I kept putting her alongside the firemen in the house last night, and I suddenly realized I didn't like them at all, and I didn't like myself at all anymore. And I thought maybe it would be best if the firemen themselves were burnt. Guy!" The front door's voice called softly. "Mrs. Montag, Mrs. Montag, someone here, someone here, Mrs. Montag, Mrs. Montag, someone here," softly. They turned to stare at the door, and the books toppled everywhere in heaps. "Beatty," said Mildred. "It can't be him. He's come back," she whispered. The front door voice called again softly. "Someone here." "We won't answer." Montag lay back against the wall and then slowly sank to the crouching position and began to nudge the books bewilderedly with his thumb, his forefinger. He was shivering, and he wanted above all to shove the books up through the ventilator again, but he knew he could not face Beatty again. He crouched, and then he sat, and the voice at the front door spoke again, more insistently. Montag picked a single small volume from the floor. "Where do we begin?" He opened the book halfway and peered at it. "We begin by beginning, I guess." "He'll come in," said Mildred, "and burn us and the books." The front door voice faded at last. There was a silence. Montag felt the presence of someone beyond the door, waiting, listening. Then the footsteps going away down the walk and over the lawn. "Let's see what this is," said Montag. He spoke the words haltingly and with a terrible self-consciousness. He read a dozen pages here and there and came at last to this. "It is computed that 11,000 persons have at several times suffered death rather than to submit to break eggs at the smaller end." Mildred sat across the hall from him. "What does it mean?" "It doesn't mean anything. The captain was right." "Here now," said Montag, "we'll start over at the beginning." Part 2. The Sieve and the Sand. They read the long afternoon through, while the cold November rain fell from the sky upon the quiet house. They sat in the hall because the parlor was so empty and gray-looking, without its walls lit with orange and yellow confetti and skyrockets and women in gold mesh dresses and men in black velvet pulling 100-pound rabbits from silver hats. The parlor was dead, and Mildred kept peering in at it with a blank expression as Montag paced the floor and came back and squatted down and read a page as many as 10 times aloud. We cannot tell the precious moment when friendship is formed, as in filling a vessel drop by drop. There is at last a drop which makes it run over. So in a series of kindnesses, there is at last one which makes the heart run over. Montag sat listening to the rain. Is that what it was in the girl next door? I've tried so hard to figure. She's dead. Let's talk about someone alive, for goodness sakes. Montag did not look back at his wife as he went trembling along the hall to the kitchen, where he stood a long time watching the rain hit the windows before he came back down the hall in the gray light, waiting for the tremble to subside. He opened another door. That favorite subject, myself. He squinted at the wall. The favorite subject, myself. I understand that one, said Mildred. But Clarice's favorite subject wasn't herself. It was everyone else and me. She was the first person in a good many years I've really liked. She was the first person I could remember who looked straight at me as if I counted. He lifted the 2 books. These men have been dead a long time, but I know their words point, one way or another, to Clarice. Outside the front door in the rain, a faint scratching. Montag froze. He saw Mildred thrust herself back to the wall and gasped. Someone! The door! Why doesn't the door voice tell us? I shut it off. Under the door sill, a slow, probing sniff, an exhilaration of electric steam. Mildred laughed. It's only a dog, that's what. You want me to shoo him away? Stay where you are. Silence, the cold rain falling, and the smell of blue electricity blowing under the locked door. Let's get back to work, said Montag quietly. Mildred kicked at a book. Books aren't people. You read and I look around, but there isn't anybody. He stared at the parlor that was dead and gray as the waters of an ocean that might teem with life if they switched on the electronic sun. Now, said Mildred, my family is people. They tell me things. I laugh. They laugh. And the colors. Yes, I know. And besides, if Captain Beatty knew about those books, she thought about it. Her face grew amazed and then horrified. He might come and bum the house and the family. That's awful. Think of our investment. Why should I read? What for? Sorry, that says he might come and burn the house and the family. What for? Why? Said Montag. I saw the damnedest snake in the world the other night. It was dead, but it was alive. I could see, but I couldn't see. You want to see that snake? It's an emergency hospital where they filed a report on all the junk the snake got out of you. Would you like to go and check their file? Maybe you'd look under Guy Montag, or maybe under Fear or War. Would you like to go to that house that burnt last night and rake ashes for the bones of the woman who set fire to her own house? What about Clarice McClellan? What do we look for her? The morgue? Listen. The bombers crossed the sky and crossed the sky over the house, gasping, murmuring, whistling like an immense invisible fan circling in emptiness. Jesus God, said Montag, every hour so many damn things in the sky. How in hell did those bombers get up there every single second of our lives? Why doesn't someone want to talk about it? We've started and won 2 atomic wars since 1960. Is it because we're having so much fun at home we've forgotten the world? Is it because we're so rich and the rest of the world's so poor and we just don't care if they are? I've heard rumors. The world is starving, but we're well fed. Is it true? The world works hard and we play. Is that why we're hated so much? I've heard the rumors about hate too, once in a long while over the years. Do you know why? I don't, that's for sure. Maybe the books can get us half out of the cave. They just might stop us from making the same damn insane mistakes. I don't hear those idiot bastards in your parlor talking about it. God, Millie, don't you see? An hour a day, 2 hours with these books, and maybe the telephone rang. Mildred snatched the phone. And she laughed. Yes, the White Clown's on tonight. Montague walked to the kitchen and threw the book down. Montague, he said, you're really stupid. Where do we go from here? Do we turn the books in? Forget it. He opened the book to read over Mildred's laughter. Poor Millie, he thought. Poor Montague. It's mud to you, too. But where do you get help? Where do you find a teacher this late? Hold on. He shut his eyes. Yes, of course. Again, he found himself thinking of the Green Park a year ago. The thought had been with him many times recently, but now he remembered how it was that day in the city park when he had seen that old man in the black suit hide something quickly in his coat. The old man leapt up as if to run, and Montague said, Wait! I haven't done anything, cried the old man, trembling. No one said you did. They had sat in the green, soft light without saying a word for a moment, and then Montague talked about the weather, and then the old man responded with a pale voice. It was a strange, quiet meeting. The old man admitted to being a retired English professor who had been thrown out upon the world 40 years ago when the last liberal arts college shut for lack of students and patronage. His name was Faber, and when he finally lost his fear of Montague, he talked in a cadenced voice, looking at the sky and the trees and the green park. And when an hour had passed, he said something to Montague, and Montague sensed it was a rhymeless poem. Then the old man grew even more courageous and said something else, and that was a poem too. Faber held his hand over his left coat pocket and spoke these words gently, and Montague knew if he reached out, he might pull a book of poetry from the man's coat. But he did not reach out. His hand stayed on his knees, numbed and useless. I don't talk things, sir, said Faber. I talk the meaning of things. I sit here and I know I'm alive. That was all there was to it, really. An hour of monologue, a poem, a comment. And then, without even acknowledging the fact that Montague was a fireman, Faber, with a certain trembling, wrote his address on a slip of paper. For your file, he said, in case you decide to be angry with me. I'm not angry, Montague said, surprised. Mildred shrieked with laughter in the hall. Montague went to his bedroom closet and flipped through his file wallet to the heading, Future Investigations. Faber's name was there. He hadn't turned it in, and he hadn't erased it. He dialed the call on a secondary phone. The phone on the far end of the line called Faber's name a dozen times before the professor answered in a faint voice. Montague identified himself and was met with a lengthy silence. Yes, Mr. Montague? Professor Faber, I have a rather odd question to ask. How many copies of the Bible are left in this country? I don't know what you're talking about. I want to know if there are any copies left at all. This is some sort of a trap. I can't talk to you, just anyone on the phone. How many copies of Shakespeare and Plato? None. You know as well as I do. None. Faber hung up. Montague put down the phone. None. A thing he knew, of course, from the firehouse listings, but somehow he had wanted to hear it from Faber himself. In the hall, Mildred's face was suffused with excitement. Well, the ladies are coming over. Montague showed her a book. This is the Old and New Testament, and don't start that again. It might be the last copy in this part of the world. You've got to hand it back tonight, don't you know? Captain Beatty knows you've got it, doesn't he? I don't think he knows which book I stole, but how do I choose a substitute? Do I turn in Mr. Jefferson, Mr. Thoreau? Which is least valuable? If I pick a substitute and Beatty does know which book I stole, he'll guess we've an entire library here. Mildred's mouth twitched. See what you're doing? You'll ruin us. Who's more important, me or that Bible? She was beginning to shriek now, sitting there like a wax doll melting in its own heat. He could hear Beatty's voice. Sit down, Montague. Watch. Delicately, like the petals of a flower. Like the first page, like the second page, each becomes a black butterfly. Beautiful, eh? Like the third page from the second, and so on, chain smoking, chapter by chapter. All the silly things the words mean, all the false promises, all the second-hand notions and time-worn philosophies. There sat Beatty, perspiring gently, the floor littered with swarms of black moths that had died in a single storm. Mildred stopped screaming as quickly as she started. Montague was not listening. There's only one thing to do, he said. Sometime before tonight, when I give the book to Beatty, I've got to have a duplicate made. You'll be here for the White Clown tonight, and the ladies coming over? Cried Mildred. Montague stopped at the door, with his back turned. Millie? A silence. What? Millie? Does the White Clown love you? No answer. Millie, he licked his lips. Does your family love you? Love you very much? Love you with all their heart and soul, Millie? He felt her blinking slowly at the back of his neck. Why'd you ask a silly question like that? He felt he wanted to cry, but nothing would happen to his eyes or his mouth. If you see that dog outside, said Mildred, give him a kick for me. He hesitated, listening at the door. He opened it and stepped out. The rain had stopped and the sun was setting in the clear sky. The street and the lawn and the porch were empty. He let his breath go in a great sigh. He slammed the door. He was on the subway. I'm numb, he thought. When did the numbness really begin in my face, in my body? The night I kicked the pill bottle in the dark, like kicking a buried mine? The numbness will go away, he thought. It'll take time, but I'll do it. Or Faber will do it for me. Someone, somewhere, will give me back the old face and the old hands the way they were. Even the smile, he thought, the old Burton smile, that's gone. I'm lost without it. The subway fled past him. Cream tile, jet black, cream tile, jet black, numerals and darkness, more darkness, and the total adding itself. Once as a child he had sat upon a yellow dune by the sea in the middle of the blue and hot summer day, trying to fill a sieve with sand, because some cruel cousin had said, fill the sieve and you'll get a dime. And the faster he poured, the faster it sifted through with a hot whispering. His hands were tired. The sand was boiling. The sieve was empty. Seated there in the middle of July without a sound, he felt the tears move down his cheeks. Now, as the vacuum underground rushed him through the dark cellars of town, jolting him, he remembered the terrible logic of that sieve, and he looked down and saw that he was carrying the Bible open. There were people in the suction train, but he held the book in his hands, and silly thought came to him. And if you read fast and read all, maybe some of the sand will stay in the sieve. But he read, and the words fell through, and he thought, in a few hours there will be Beatty, and here will be me handing this over, so no phrase must escape me. Each line must be memorized. I will myself to do it. He clenched the book in his fists. Trumpets blared. Denham's dentifrice. Shut up, thought Montague. Consider the lilies of the field. Denham's dentifrice. They toil not. Denham's. Consider the lilies of the field. Shut up, shut up. Dentifrice. He tore the book open and flipped the pages and felt them as if he were blind. He picked up the shape of the individual letters, not blinking. Denham spelled D-E-N. They toil not, neither do they. A fierce whisper of hot sand through empty sieve. Denham's does it. Consider the lilies, the lilies, the lilies. Denham's dental detergent. Shut up, shut up, shut up. It was a plea, a cry so terrible that Montague found himself on his feet. The shocked inhabitants of the loud car staring, moving back from this man with the insane, gorged face, the gibbering, dry mouth, the flapping book in his fist. The people who had been sitting a moment before, tapping their feet to the rhythm of Denham's dentifrice, Denham's dandy dental detergent. Denham's dentifrice, dentifrice, dentifrice. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. The people whose mouths had been faintly twitching the words, dentifrice, dentifrice, dentifrice. The train radio vomited upon Montague in retaliation. a great ton-load of music made of tin, copper, silver, chromium, and brass. The people were pounded into submission. They did not run. There was no place to run. The great air train fell down its shaft in the earth. Lilies of the field. Denhams. Lilies, I said. The people stared. Call the guard. The man's off. No view. The train hissed to its stop. No view, a cry. Denhams, a whisper. Montague's mouth barely moved. Lilies. The train door whistled open. Montague stood. The door gasped, started shut. Only then did he leap past the other passengers, screaming in his mind, plunged through the slicing door only in time. He ran on the white tiles up through the tunnel, ignoring the escalators, because he wanted to feel his feet move, arms swing, lungs clench, unclench, feel his throat go raw with air. A voice drifted after him. Denhams, Denhams, Denhams. The train hissed like a snake, and the train vanished in its hole. Who is it? Montague out here. What do you want? Let me in. I haven't done anything. I'm alone, damn it. You swear it? I swear. The front door opened slowly. Faber peered out, looking very old in the light and very fragile and very much afraid. The old man looked as if he had not been out of the house in years. He and the white plaster walls inside were much the same. There was white in the flesh of his mouth and his cheeks, and his hair was white, and his eyes had faded with white and the vague blueness there. Then his eyes touched on the book under Montague's arm. And he did not look so old any more, and not quite as fragile. Slowly his fear went. I'm sorry. One has to be careful. He looked at the book under Montague's arm and could not stop. So it's true. Montague stepped inside. The door shut. Sit down. Faber backed up, as if he feared the book might vanish if he took his eyes from it. Behind him, the door to a bedroom stood open, and in that room a litter of machinery and steel tools was strewn upon a desktop. Montague had only a glimpse before. Faber, seeing Montague's attention diverted, turned quickly and shut the bedroom door and stood holding the knob with a trembling hand. His gaze returned unsteadily to Montague, who was now seated with the book in his lap. The book, where did you... I stole it. Faber, for the first time, raised his eyes and looked directly into Montague's face. You're brave. No, said Montague. My wife's dying. A friend of mine's already dead. Someone who may have been a friend was burnt less than 24 hours ago. You're the only one I knew who might help me. To see. Faber's hands twitched on his knees. May I? Sorry. Montague gave him the book. It's been a long time. I'm not a religious man, but it's been a long time. Faber turned to the pages, stopping here and there to read. It's as good as I remember. Lord, how they've changed it in our parlors these days. Christ is one of the family now. I often wonder if God recognizes his own son the way we've dressed him up, or is it dressed him down? He's a regular peppermint stick now, all sugar crystal and saccharin, when he isn't making veiled references to certain commercial products that every worshiper absolutely needs. Faber sniffed the book. Do you know that books smell like nutmeg or some spice from a foreign land? I loved to smell them when I was a boy. Lord, there was a lot of lovely books once, before we let them go. Faber turned to the pages. Mr. Montague, you are looking at a coward. I saw the way things were going a long time back. I said nothing. I'm one of the innocents who could have spoken up and out when no one would listen to the guilty, but I did not speak and thus became guilty myself. And when finally they set the structure to burn the books using the firemen, I grunted a few times and subsided, for there were no other grunts or yelling with me by then. Now it's too late. Faber closed the Bible. Well, suppose you tell me why you came here. Nobody listens anymore. I can't talk to the walls because they're yelling at me. I can't talk to my wife. She listens to the walls. I just want someone to hear what I have to say. And maybe if I talk long enough, it'll make sense. And I want you to teach me to understand what I read." Faber examined Montague's thin, blue-jowled face. "How did you get shaken up? What knocked the torch out of your hands?" "I don't know. We have everything we need to be happy, but we aren't happy. Something's missing." I looked around. The only thing I positively knew was gone was the books I'd burned in 10 or 12 years, so I thought books might help. "You're a hopeless romantic," said Faber. "It would be funny if it were not serious. It's not books you need. It's some of the things that once were in books. The same things could be in the parlor families today. The same infinite detail and awareness could be projected through the radios and televisors, but are not. No, it's not books at all you're looking for. Take it where you can find it. In old phonograph records, old motion pictures, and in old friends. Look for it in nature and look for it in yourself. Books were only one type of receptacle where we stored a lot of things we were afraid we might forget. There's nothing magical in them at all. Magic is only in what books say, how they stitched the patches of the universe together into one garment for us. Of course, you couldn't know this. Of course, you still can't understand what I mean when I say all this. You are intuitively right. That's what counts. 3 things are missing. Number 1, do you know why books such as this are so important? Because they have quality. And what does the word quality mean? To me, it means texture. The book has pores, it has features. This book can go under the microscope. You didn't find life under the glass, streaming past in infinite profusion. The more pores, the more truthfully recorded details of life per square inch you can get on a sheet of paper, the more literary you are. That's my definition anyway. Telling detail, fresh detail. The good writers took life often. The mediocre ones run a quick hand over her. The bad ones rape her and leave her for the flies. So now you see why books are hated and feared. They show the pores in the face of life. The comfortable people want only wax moon faces, poreless, hairless, expressionless. We are living in a time when flowers are trying to live on flowers instead of growing on good rain and black loam. Even fireworks, for all their prettiness, come from the chemistry of the earth. Yet somehow we think we can grow, feeding on flowers and fireworks without completing the cycle back to reality. Do you know the legend of Hercules and Antaeus, the giant wrestler, whose strength was incredible so long as he stood firmly on the ground? But when he was held, rootless in midair by Hercules, he perished easily. If there isn't something in that legend for us today, in this city, in our time, then I am completely insane. Well, there we have the first thing I said we needed: quality, texture of information. And the second, leisure. Oh, but we've plenty of off hours. Off hours, yes, but time to think? If you're not driving 100 miles an hour at a clip where you can't think of anything else but the danger, then you're playing some game or sitting in some room where you can't argue with the 4-wall televisor. Why? The televisor is real. It is immediate. It has dimension. It tells you what to think and blasts it in. It must be right. It seems so right. It rushes you on so quickly to its own conclusions your mind hasn't time to protest. What nonsense. Only the family is people. I beg your pardon? My wife say books aren't real. Thank God for that. You can shut them, say. Hold on a moment. You play God to it. But who has ever torn himself from the claw that encloses you when you drop a seed in a TV parlor? It grows you any shape it wishes. It's an environment as real as the world. It becomes and is the truth. Books can be beaten down with reason. With all my knowledge and skepticism, I have never been able to argue with a 100-piece symphony orchestra, full color, 3 dimensions, and I being in and part of those incredible parlors. As you see, my parlor is nothing but 4 plaster walls, and here, he held out 2 small rubber plugs, for my ears when I ride the subway jets. Denham's dentifrice, they toil not, neither do they spin, said Montague, eyes shut. Where do we go from here? Would books help us? Only if the third necessary thing could be given us. Number 1, as I said, quality of information. Number 2, leisure to digest it. And number 3, the right to carry out actions based on what we learn from the interaction of the first 2. And I hardly think a very old man and a fireman turned sour could do much this late in the game. I can get books. You're running a risk. That's the good part of dying. When you've nothing to lose, you run any risk you want. There, you've said an interesting thing, laughed Faber, without having read it. Are things like that in books? But it came off the top of my mind. All the better. You didn't fancy it up for me or anyone, even yourself. Montag leaned forward. This afternoon, I thought that if it turned out the books were worthwhile, we might get a press and print some extra copies. We? You and I. Oh, no, Faber sat up. But let me tell you my plan. If you insist on telling me, I must ask you to leave. But aren't you interested? Not if you start talking the sort of talk that might get me burned for my trouble. The only way I could possibly listen to you would be if somehow the fireman structure itself could be burnt. Now, if you suggest that we print extra books and arrange to have them hidden in firemen's houses all over the country so that seeds of suspicion would be sown among these arsonists, bravo, I'd say. Plant the books, turn in an alarm, and see the firemen's houses burn? Is that what you mean? Faber raised his eyebrows and looked at Montag as if he were seeing a new man. I was joking. If you thought it would be a plan worth trying, I'd have to take your word it would help. You can guarantee things like that? After all, when we had all the books we needed, we still insisted on finding the highest cliff to jump off. But we do need a breather. We do need knowledge. And perhaps in 1,000 years, we might pick smaller cliffs to jump off. The books are to remind us what asses and fools we were. Their Caesarian Praetorian guard, whispering at the parade roars down the avenue. Remember, Caesar, thou art mortal. Most of us can't rush around talking to everyone, know all the cities of the world. We haven't time, money, or that many friends. The things you're looking for, Montag, are in the world, but the only way the average chap will ever see 99% of them is in a book. Don't ask for guarantees, and don't look to be saved in any one thing, person, machine, or library. Do your own bit of saving. And if you drown, at least die knowing you were headed for shore. Faber got up and began to pace the room. Well, asked Montag, you're absolutely serious? Absolutely. It's an insidious plan, if I do say so myself. Faber glanced nervously at his bedroom door. To see the firehouses burn across the land, destroy as hotbeds of treason. The salamander devours his tail. Oh, God. I've a list of firemen's residents everywhere with some sort of underground. Can't trust people. That's the dirty part. You and I, and who else, will set the fires? Aren't there professors like yourself, former writers, historians, linguists, dead or ancient? The older the better they'll go unnoticed. You know dozens, admit it. Oh, there are many actors alone who haven't acted Pirandello or Shaw or Shakespeare for years because their plays are too aware of the world. We could use their anger, and we could use the honest rage of those historians who haven't written a line for 40 years. True, we might form classes in thinking and reading. Yes, but that would just nibble the edges. The whole culture shot through. The skeleton needs melting and reshaping. Good God, it isn't as simple as just picking up a book you laid down half a century ago. Remember, the firemen are rarely necessary. The public itself stopped reading of its own accord. The firemen provide a circus now, and then at which buildings are set off and crowds gather for the pretty blaze. But it's a small sideshow indeed, and hardly necessary to keep things in line. So few want to be rebels anymore. And out of those few, most, like myself, scare easily. Can you dance faster than the white clown? Shout louder than Mr. Gimmick and the Parlor families? If you can, you'll win your way, Montag. In any event, you're a fool. People are having fun. Committing suicide, murdering. A bomber flight had been moving east all the time they talked. and only now did the two men stop and listen, feeling the great jet sound tremble inside themselves. Patience, Montag. Let the war turn off the families. Our civilization is flinging itself to pieces. Stand back from the centrifuge. There has to be someone ready when it blows up. What? Men quoting Milton, saying, I remember Sophocles, reminding the survivors that man has his good side too? They will only gather up their stones to hurl at each other. Montag, go home. Go to bed. Why waste your final hours racing about your cage, denying you're a squirrel? Then you don't care anymore? I care so much I'm sick. And you won't help me? Good night. Good night. Montag's hands picked up the Bible. He saw what his hands had done and he looked surprised. Would you like to own this? Faber said, I'd give my right arm. Montag stood there and waited for the next thing to happen. His hands, by themselves, like two men working together, began to rip the pages from the book. The hands tore the flyleaf, and then the first, and then the second page. Idiot, what are you doing? Faber sprang up as if he had been struck. He fell against Montag. Montag warded him off and let his hands continue. 6 more pages fell to the floor. He picked them up and wadded the paper under Faber's gaze. Don't, oh, don't, said the old man. Who can stop me? I'm a fireman. I can burn you. The old man stood looking at him. You wouldn't. I could. The book. Don't tear it any more. Faber sank into a chair, his face very white, his mouth trembling. Don't make me feel any more tired. What do you want? I need you to teach me. All right, all right. Montag put the book down. He began to unwad the crumpled paper and flatten it out as the old man watched tiredly. Faber shook his head as if he were waking up. Montag, have you some money? Some, for $500. Why? Bring it. I know a man who printed our college paper half a century ago. That was the year I came to class at the start of the new semester and found only one student to sign up for drama from Aeschylus to O'Neill. You see? How like a beautiful statue of ice it was, melting in the sun. I remember the newspapers dying like huge moths. No one wanted them back. No one missed them. And the government saying how advantageous it was to have people reading only about passionate lips and the fist in the stomach. Circle the situation with your fire eaters. So Montag, there's this unemployed printer. We might start a few books and wait on the war to break the pattern and give us the push we need. A few bombs in the families and the walls of all the houses, like harlequin rats, will shut up and silence our stage whisper might carry. They both stood looking at the book on the table. I've tried to remember, said Montag, but hell, it's gone when I turn my head. God, how I want something to say to the captain. He's read enough, so he has all the answers, or seems to have. His voice is like butter. I'm afraid he'll talk me back the way I was. Only a week ago, pumping a kerosene hose, I thought, God, what fun. The old man nodded. Those who don't build must burn. It's as old as history and juvenile delinquents. So that's what I am? There's some of it in all of us. Montag moved toward the front door. Can you help me in any way tonight? With a fire, Captain? I need an umbrella to keep off the rain. I'm so damned afraid I'll drown if he gets me again. The old man said nothing, but glanced once more nervously at his bedroom. Montag caught the glance. Well? The old man took a deep breath, held it, and let it out. He took another, eyes closed, his mouth tight, and at last exhaled. Montag? The old man turned at last and said, Come along. I would actually have let you walk right out of this house. I'm a cowardly old fool. Faber opened the bedroom door and led Montag into a small chamber where stood a table upon which a number of metal tools lay among a welter of microscopic wire hairs, tiny coils, bobbins, and crystals. What's this? Asked Montag. Proof of my terrible cowardice. I've lived alone so many years, throwing images on walls with my imagination. Fiddling with electronics, radio transmission has been my hobby. My cowardice is of such a passion, complementing the revolutionary spirit that lives in its shadow. I was forced to design this. He picked up a small green metal object no larger than a 22 bullet. I paid for all this how? Playing the stock market, of course, the last refuge in the world for the dangerous intellectual out of a job. Well, I played the market and built all this, and I've waited. I've waited, trembling, half a lifetime for someone to speak to me. I dared speak to no one. That day in the park when we sat together, I knew that someday you might drop by. With fire or friendship, it was hard to guess. I've had this little item ready for months, but I almost let you go. I'm that afraid. It looks like a seashell radio. And something more, it listens. If you put it in your ear, Montag, I can sit comfortably home warming my frightened bones and hear and analyze the fireman's world, find its weaknesses without danger. I'm the queen bee safe in the hive. You will be the drone, the traveling ear. Eventually, I could put our ears into all parts of the city with various men listening and evaluating. If the drones die, I'm still safe at home, tending my fright with a maximum of comfort and a minimum of chance. See how safe I play it, how contemptible I am? Montag placed the green bullet in his ear. The old man inserted a similar object in his own ear and moved his lips. Montag! The voice was in Montag's head. I hear you. The old man laughed. You're coming over fine, too, Faber whispered, but the voice in Montag's head was clear. Go to the firehouse when it's time. I'll be with you. Let's listen to this Captain Beatty together. He could be one of us, God knows. I'll give you things to say. We'll give him a good show. Do you hate me for this electronic cowardice of mine? Here I am sending you out into the night while I stay behind the lines with my damned ears, listening for you to get your head chopped off. We all do what we do, said Montag. He put the Bible in the old man's hand. Here. I'll chance turning in a substitute. Tomorrow. I'll see the unemployed printer. Yes, that much I can do. Good night, Professor. Not good night. I'll be with you the rest of the night. A vinegar gnat tickling your ear when you need me. But good night and good luck anyway. The door opened and shut. Montag was in the dark street again, looking at the world.